Okay, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yes? Great. Nods from the back. Great stuff. Well, alongside Mariah Katz, my name is Peter Boyd. I'm the CEO of Time for Good and Senior Advisor to Blackstone Energy, and I'm going to be your Master of Ceremony alongside Mariah. Just to say welcome back, and thanks very much to coming for day two, a crucial piece of the climate change solutions. It's in finance. So I just wanted to cover, before we hand over to our first keynote speaker, a couple of ground rules, as well as a quick recap on what we heard yesterday. First, ground rules. Please sort of respect both the audience, the experts. They've come typically from very long distances to share with you their expertise. So please respect them. Please respect each other in terms of your time slots and answering the questions. And that includes, for those that were here yesterday, lively responses from the floor. They're also welcome, but if they could also keep to time. And then if they raise good points, if the panelists could also answer the questions as well. That's what I was most interested in yesterday. So if that's the ground rules, I think in terms of what we heard yesterday, I think the really interesting piece going from yesterday into today is this challenge of scaling up the movement of money into the mainstream from the sort of 400 billion we have to at least the trillion we need in global climate finance. And in terms of infrastructure, the 3 trillion that needs to almost double to 6 trillion over the next couple of decades. And can that be resilient? I think the piece we got loud and clear yesterday, not just in these halls, but other halls, was the increased sense of urgency this year versus last, the increased knowledge of how compelling it is from a scientific case we have to move. But I think the exciting piece from yesterday was that the business case is getting more compelling. The idea that the clean energy and the numerous adjacent business models, things like we heard about AI, sharing economy, and other business models and technologies, are driving the cost of clean energy down. So it's becoming cleaner, smarter, more abundant, and cheaper, while the fossil fuel piece is almost a squiggly upward line going through that, getting harder, dirtier, and more expensive. And so, in fact, in terms of a business case, we're actually saying, which financiers are betting on this crossover not happening in their sector or their geography? And then to take Nick Stern's points from yesterday in other halls, are they also betting against public policy backing up the Paris Agreement? So it's becoming an increasingly risky financial bet to do inaction and increasingly compelling for action. And then just before this whole day, and one of the very first panelists, Mary Robinson, will no doubt talking about this, is also combining this piece of financing the transition to net zero economy to what quality of transition to the net zero economy, and not a just transition. So while finance can move very quickly, people, communities, jobs can't move nearly so quickly. So it'll be interesting to see what quality of transition we finance and the importance of that, not just the scale of the finance that's needed. So really, I think if I was to take 2 words from yesterday, and the challenge for today is moving on from fragile to resilient, not just the infrastructure, but also the returns, the financial returns of those in the room, and then obviously the jobs of the people that we're ultimately financing in the first place. So with that, we've got a very full day, and it's an exciting one. And we want to kick off by warmly welcoming you to invite the stage keynote speaker, Bertrand Piccard, who is an explorer and the chairman of the Solar Impulse Foundation. And so please give him a warm round of applause.
Thank you very much. Good morning, John. Good morning, Mary, dear friends. When I brought the idea of the Solar Impulse project to the world of aviation, all the specialists told me it was impossible. It was impossible to have an airplane that would be so efficient. It was impossible to have an airplane that was so big in wingspan, so light in the structure. Nevertheless, it happened. What's the lesson we have to learn from it? Is that the experts are very good in knowing what they know, but they are prisoners of old ways of thinking. They are captured by their own experience and what they have believed in the past. And it is not what we need to move ahead. Who built the airplane? A shipyard. Who funded it? The industry that was outside of the world of energy and outside of the world of aviation. So when we speak about energy efficiency, when we speak about financing, when we speak about climate change, we need to include also the people who don't know that it's impossible to change. We have to include all the pioneering way of thinking. In other terms, we have to change the paradigm that prevents us to move ahead. I just give you an example. When the father of my grandfather installed the first telephone in Switzerland, all his colleagues who were also professors in the university said that it had no future. They were not stupid, but they had the paradigm where they believed that we had to pull a telephone line between every house and every house in the world, which means billions of lines. What was the revolution? It was not the telephone, it was the invention of the operating center, where you have just one line coming to an operator that connects everybody together. So you see which is the paradigm each time that we have to change if we want to move ahead. And I believe that today, the paradigm that prevents us to move is the fact that we believe that fighting climate change is expensive, and we are begging for donors to bring trillions of dollars when we can change the paradigm into offering the opportunity of investment to newcomers who can make a fortune out of their investment. And why that? It's because we have to move from the old world to the new world. These were the reflections I had when I was flying above the Pacific and above the Atlantic in Solar Impulse. Can you imagine the situation? You're alone in your cockpit. You look at the sun that gives you the entire energy you need for your 4 electric motors and the batteries that make you fly through the night to the next sunrise. So you can fly perpetually. And when you look at your motors with the huge propellers turning, you have no noise. You have no pollution. You have no fuel. And suddenly you think, wow, I'm in the future. I'm in a film of science fiction. And not at all. You are in the present, in what the technologies of today allow to do today. And then you understand that it's the rest of the world that is in the past. The rest of the world that is still with old, inefficient devices. The only thing modern we have is our smartphone. Why do we still have combustion engines, incandescent light bulbs, badly insulated houses, heating, cooling, and lighting systems that are still the same system than in 1880? We have still the stupid grid compared to the smart grid that we need. Old industrial processes. Half of the energy we use is wasted because of old, inefficient systems. We are in the most fantastic opportunity for the industry to open the biggest market ever for humankind. Because basically we have to replace everything. And everything we replace is profitable. It creates jobs, it makes profit, and it obtains a clean growth. A clean growth. We won't have more houses or more cars or more heaters or more industries. No, we will replace what is outdated by something that is efficient, something that cleans the situation of today. So it's clear that a clean future is much better than the dirty status quo we have today. And it allows, finally, the reconciliation between ecology and economy. Because we can be logical, not only ecological. So we are here in COP23 because we know that. But the rest of the world outside Bonn doesn't know it enough, at least. And I think our task is to have the arguments to motivate others to change. So as a psychiatrist, I can tell you that most of the people change only under 2 conditions. If they are obliged to change, or if they have a personal interest to do it. But they will not change for the beauty of the ice of the South Pole. They will change if the regulation obliges them to change, or if it is profitable to change. When you know that changing all the light bulbs to LED in the world saves $120 billion each year, you wonder why people don't do it. They don't do it because of the weight of the habits. So we have finance to change or regulation. The best, of course, is to have both. And this is what we have launched yesterday, the World Alliance for Efficient Solutions. It's not just using Solar Impulse to celebrate a success, but to go further. There are solutions everywhere in the world, but they are mostly hidden in startups, in labs, universities, or sometimes big corporations, but they don't come enough on the market. And why that? Because very often we think that we have to push innovation, we have to push technology by subsidies, public money, funding of research. So of course we have to do it, it's good. But what happens? You get a lot of patents that just disappear in nature. We need to do also a pull of the innovation. Pulling the innovation by having a very strong legal framework that is going to oblige the people, the industry, the population, the governments, everybody, to use the solutions we have today. And the solutions of today could already divide by 2 the CO2 emissions. One of the important ways to pull is, of course, what combines politics and funding. I mean, of course, the price on carbon. What is so interesting is to see that when you speak of carbon price to people who pay no tax on carbon, they say, no, no, we don't want it. It's a terrible distortion of competitivity. If you ask to people who have a carbon tax in their country or in their factory or in their corporation, what do you hear? You hear that it's the best way to increase competitivity because it obliges the factory or the producer or the industry to be more energy efficient, to save. I think the highest carbon tax I've heard is Sweden with 145 euros per ton of CO2. When I'm speaking about that in Switzerland, they say it's terrible, it's horrible. When you speak to the Swedish, they say we are more competitive than the Swiss now, thanks to this. So you also, of course, have the green bonds. This is a new way of finance. But please never say that you are begging for donators for trillions of dollars for a big, expensive, and enormous problem, because we discourage everybody. What we've seen with the World Alliance of Efficient Solutions is all the incredible investment opportunities that the world of innovation is offering. We're bringing startups and corporations together. We are helping experts to assess the credibility of the solutions, and then we present all these solutions to investors. And you have investment funds that are members of this alliance because they know that this alliance will be a huge tank of potential success. So, of course, maybe we could make a philosophical speech in saying that the awareness of the beauty of the planet should be philosophically and spiritually enough to save the world. But it's not the case. Finance and regulation is much more efficient to reach the goal. And what is so interesting is that even climate change deniers have to take these opportunities if they want to make the money. You know that renewable energies create 12 times more jobs than the normal economy. So let's make all the effort we can to change course, not only for nature, but for the sustainability of economy and finance. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bertrand, for not only a compelling vision of the future, but also the present. And to continue these sessions, opening sessions theme of scaling up climate finance through markets, innovation, leadership, I'd like to welcome the moderator, Patrick Scheurle of Blue Orchard, up onto the stage with his distinguished panelists.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, welcome everyone. The World Economic Forum forecasts or estimates that by 2020 we need an annual 5.7 trillion US dollars investments in green infrastructure. This means shifting 5 trillion US dollars of investments in traditional assets to green infrastructure, as well as mobilizing an additional 700 billion US dollars on an annual basis in order to contain global warming within the 2 degrees Celsius target. Today, we are going to discuss how markets can be mobilized, can be transformed to reach that goal, what leadership it takes to get there, as well as how innovation can support this process. You will also have the opportunity to ask questions directly to our panelists in the second half of this session, and I would like to introduce the distinguished panelists to you. Right next to me, we have Mary Robinson, President of the Mary Robinson Foundation, Climate Justice, former President of Ireland. We have Jonathan Taylor, Vice President with the European Investment Bank. We have Anne-Mette Soler-Mi, Director of Renewable Energy at Carbonex. We have Jake Leyes, Director, Sustainability Market Development for the North American, European, and Asia-Pacific markets at Autodesk. And we have John Roome, Director of Climate Change with the World Bank. Mary Robinson, help us getting our head around this. We have a significant challenge ahead. It's important, it's urgent. How has not been more happening in terms of scaling up climate finance?
It's a very important question, and I'm really glad to be on this panel to discuss it. There was a doubt when I arrived this morning because it was going to be all men except me, and I won't do that anymore. I won't sit on a panel that I'm the token woman, but happily Anne-Mette was able to join, so that's fine. A very important question because finance, as we've heard, can really shift this. And I think it's because there's actually a lack of awareness of the benefits of financing the future, in effect, financing the jobs that we need, financing in the way that is so important. And I'd like to really link back to a breakfast I was at this morning. I'm the challenger, if you like, of the B team. I co-chair the net zero task force of the B team, committing to net zero the climate justice way, doing it with just transition, and being business that is engaged in leadership, in moving to the clean energy that we need, the jobs that we need, the future that we need. They believe it. They've made the transition. Recently, I was in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa, for a meeting of ministers of least developed countries. And the interesting thing for me was they also get it. They are so ambitious to move to clean energy. All of their plans, the nationally determined contributions, as we call them in this system, all of their plans are about going clean energy well before 2050. In the case of Ethiopia itself, which has good climate policy, it's 2025. They want to be middle income and low carbon economy, clean economy. And they showed us 2 projects that I found really very interesting. One was a light rail in Addis, 2 lines, not just a light rail for commuter convenience, but heavily subsidized so that the very poor have very cheap travel. And that's important in a fast-growing country like Ethiopia. The second project we saw was a waste-to-energy project, the first in Africa, huge building which will take 80% of the waste of Addis. Waste in poor countries is more valuable because it's less packaged and therefore it's easier to convert into energy. And I saw waste pickers picking on the slag heaps near this building, which will open in a few months' time. It's a Swedish project. And I asked the question, well, what about the jobs of the waste pickers? Because they will be out of their jobs. And I was told, no, we have an MOU already with these waste pickers. They will make bricks from the final product, the sort of ash product that we have. It'll be safer. That's another example of a transition that's people-centered and appropriate. And I believe that financing the ambition of developing countries is hugely important now because the political will is there. Why can't we get the money to make sure that they can move in the right direction?
Jonathan, from your perspective with the EIB, very generally, how can we scale up climate financing to really take action?
Well, I think if I may be allowed to build on Bertrand's points, which he made earlier, and I didn't know what Bertrand was going to say, but I thought he absolutely nailed the point here on this particular thing, because I think that scaling up and overcoming the challenges which require us to scale up requires both sticks and it requires carrots. And the stick is regulation, and the carrot is incentives of different sorts, market incentives. And what sits behind both of those is a requirement towards transparency, because the challenge which we have fundamentally is that we have a lot of externalities, as the economists would call it, in this space, which aren't properly accounted for. So in particular, on the stick side, the carbon pricing side, absolutely right. People can get away without taking full account of the actual costs of what they're doing in terms of their calculation about their business decisions and the rest of it. So I'm very supportive of the idea of carbon pricing. I would say, just by way of illustration, we use an internal carbon pricing model for our own investments and our own lending in the bank, which the price of which varies depending on the lifetime of the project, but it fluctuates between a bottom level of 37 euros per ton up to 120. So not quite at the level of the Swedes, but this is what we consider to be an appropriate one for making the proper measurement and the assessment. And the key point, of course, is that is actually a much higher price than the price which is currently the one which is out there in the emissions trading scheme. So we need to make progress on that and incentivize things that way. On the other side of the coin, we need, I think, to be more transparent in terms of the funding which we're using. That includes green bonds, green finance generally. We need to try to arrive at a clearer understanding of what we're talking about, a clearer taxonomy. If I may put in a little plug here, we've been working with the People's Bank of China to try to map out the different terminologies which are being used here. We need to take that work forward, building it into the World Bank's another sustainable the roadmap for sustainable finance, and take forward all these different streams of work which are moving ahead in that way. But that's the key thing: is to ensure that to get markets to work properly, you've got to get the pricing accurate. And getting the pricing accurate means bringing in the externalities.
From our experience at Blue Orchard as an investment manager, we certainly appreciate the financing side, but there is also the other side of the equation, the companies which really make things happen on the ground in the end. Anne-Mette, from your experience with Carbonex, how do you find investors?
I think the difficulties is in targeting the right investors, actually. When you are convinced about your product and your innovation, you want the world to know and you want to extend. And it's very difficult to target the right investors who share the same philosophy and to make them discover what you're in. We are a small company, and it's not always easy to be seen in the big world. We're very happy to be here at the Galerie, at the COP23, where we are very visible. But I think targeting is in both ways, actually, maybe an issue.
Mm-hmm. So it's as Bertrand Piccard mentioned, you're one of the hidden gems that need to be become more visible, and I think that's a great audience here to make that happen as well. Let's stay on the investment side, on the company side for a moment. Jake, how can technology help investors to make better, greener investment decisions?
Yeah, so this is a very important point for us as a technology company, providing software for architects and designers and engineers. And technology always has been historically an enabler and a shaper of what gets done. And so we believe that technology has a role to play to inform about investment decisions. So specifically, if you look into the built environment, or the construction is estimated to grow significantly by 2030. So we have to take into account resource constraints, but at the same time wanting to build better high-performance cities, high-performance buildings, and going towards net zero. So there are a couple of things where technology can provide that information, and how do you make that decision. That goes into looking into data that allows you to analyze and simulate an entire building block for identifying retrofitting candidates so that you can reduce energy consumption and increase efficiencies. And obviously with a new building or new infrastructure, there are the opportunities where you also can do a triple bottom line analysis. So the point being, specifically in the built environment, to build socially, environmentally, and economically vibrant cities. And the technology has a role to play to inform these decisions, not just to the designers and the architects, but also to the city planners, the civil engineers, and everybody who is involved. The one thing that we often say is that the challenges that we face today is a design challenge, but it's also related to the fact that 30, 40, 50 years ago, we hadn't quite had that insight. It was also a design flaw. And so today, through the activities that we do, mitigating and adaptation, we want to ensure that we have a role to play where technology can inform investors and understand what is the return and how value can be grown.
John, help us to make this a bit more accessible for investors. Which concrete instruments or mechanisms do you see have the most potential to scale up climate finance?
Very good. So I think your introduction was very good on what the scale of the problem is. We've got this much investment going, we need this much. Okay, so it's got orders of magnitude difference. We're not talking about tweaking at the edges. At the same time, we've got these huge financial markets, and everybody gets very excited about the fact that green bonds are growing so quickly. We're going to get to $120 billion this year. It's less than 1% of the total bond issues. And so it's very small. So there's only a very small part of the financial system that's financing a very small part of investments. This needs to grow. One of the propositions I'd put on the table is we have to radically rethink the intermediation in the financial sector in order to get this scaling up. So what do I mean by that? You've got a whole bunch of financial institutions and a whole bunch of money that's sitting there earning relatively low rates of interest with high potential opportunities. Why are they not meeting up? One of it is risk-reward trade-off, because some of these investors are looking, yeah, they like the high returns, but they also want the risk to come down. And the second issue is the transaction cost of dealing with. I think I really liked your intervention, because it's great. You're looking for financing, but if you're sitting there with Deutsche Bank on the other side, they're not going to come looking for you and to tailor all their stuff to you. So I think what we need to be thinking about is a range of intermediation products that do three things. One, they de-risk the investments to take place. We've got to find mechanisms, guarantees, offtake guarantees, political risk guarantees, a whole foreign exchange guarantees, mechanisms to hedging mechanisms to offset those risks to bring those financiers in. Second thing that we need to do is we need to aggregate. Think about rooftop solar. Lots of little investments. You're not going to get big money going one by one. You need aggregator mechanisms that put it together so that you can get it in a scale. Third thing you need is standardization. There's a lot of products out there, a lot of guarantees, EIB offers, we offer, financial institutions offer. But if you're looking at it, there's a plethora of these things out there, and the language is all different. People think about different things. If we could standardize these things, so I don't think it's so much a particular instrument, but a range of things that de-risk, aggregate, and standardize. Having said that, I think I fully support the fact that we've got to get the incentives right, and so we've got to price carbon. I won't repeat all the arguments, they've been clearly made, but there's one other driver that's important, and that is disclosure. The task force on climate-related financial disclosures, I think, would be very important, because once you get that in place, once you've started through voluntary disclosure, once you eventually, in a few years' time, start seeing this coming into regulation, you will then have investors disclosing what's happening. It'll start creating the incentives that will force companies to think about that. So I don't think it's so much a specific instrument, but a package of things that need to happen.
What's also very important is taking and demonstrating leadership. I think many institutions represented here do that. Mary Robinson, what type of leadership does it take to scale up climate finance?
I think this is a very key issue. Leadership really matters. And it's happening. It's happening with cities, for example, committing to be zero carbon by 2030, 2040, much before 2050 at this stage. It's happening in the B team, where in January 2015, they made a commitment to be net zero carbon by net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, the climate justice way, with a just transition. And I think this is really the important thing that if the financial world would put a stake in the ground and work backwards, why do we have subsidies on fossil fuel? It's ridiculous, and I agree with you, we need a carbon price. But we need actually to have much more thinking about what we need to do working backwards from 2050 and then recognize how much we need to do by 2020. I moderated a media event yesterday in the COP with Christiana Figueres and 3 scientists. And the scientists spelt out without question how urgent it is and that we have very little time. And I think that's what the financial world has to have more in mind. And yes, it will take both the regulation and the incentives. But I think more than anything else, it's a leadership issue now. And I'm very glad, because I chair the task force on net zero with David Crane of the B team, that the B team are taking seriously that they have to take steps and be measured. They have to be accountable. They have to be transparent, the words we've been using. And they are going to report regularly on the progress because they feel they have to, they have to be leaders because there are going to be laggards, as they said. And I think in the financial world, we have to take seriously that Paris commitment, that all financing should be aligned with the purposes of Paris. That's an urgent purpose now, and finance will make all the difference.
Let's build on that with Jake. So your institution is highly committed to creating a sustainable future. What motivates you and your colleagues to work towards that goal? And how do you see the role of a company like Autodesk in supporting that process?
Yeah, what motivates us is our customers. I think that's sort of the most important thing that we can do as a company. So Autodesk, as I said earlier, we are having customers in the architecture, construction, engineering, so the entire built environment and manufacturing industries. And our software enables people to make anything. So we are uniquely positioned and really want to be in a position where we are co-creating a future. Our vision statement is helping people imagine, design, and create a better world. And the better world definition for us is that by 2050, 10 billion people live within the means of this planet and live well within the means of this planet. And it goes a little bit towards what you saying earlier about de-risking investments. So going forward, our customers can increasingly no longer ignore this. And coming back to what motivates us, it's a little bit what Bertrand Piccard said this morning, is designing the impossible, or recognizing that the impossible isn't impossible, but it's actually possible, as you demonstrated. So that is something where we get up in the morning and want to ensure that we do this with our large companies that have global operations, or through the support we provide to non-profit charitable organizations, startups. The Autodesk Foundation has been supporting a number of different companies. We have grantees that we support. As an example, I think it was 27.5 million worth of software that we donated to non-profit organizations using design and design technology to overcome climate challenges, social, environmental challenges in 55 countries worldwide. So it's not really just the big players Of course, they have an important role to play because they're the ones who make the cities and the cars that we use and in our daily life. But it's also the small players, the ground up, the grassroots players, an individual who has an idea of helping frontline healthcare workers in countries where there are no other ways of identifying people. So there's a small company called Simprint. They do biometric readers. And because 95% of the world has 2G connection. So the opportunity there is actually use the cloud and create an internet of patients that they're looking into, and we are supporting an organization like this. So it goes through a whole range, but to answer your question, these are the type of things that motivate us and inspire us.
Fantastic. And you mentioned the small and big players. Let's turn to the big players for a moment. Development finance institutions, Jonathan, they certainly play a vital role in scaling up climate finance. Can you share an example with us how the EIB supports that process?
Sure. Well, just by way of illustration, I mean, we have, as John was saying, all of us have a whole range of products and different initiatives across the piece. But just one example which may help to bring this out. It's an initiative which we've done partnering up with the government of Luxembourg, which is actually the first time that we've done a direct partnership with the government of a member state, called the Luxembourg EIB Climate Finance Platform. So there's a clue in the name of who's involved and what it's targeted towards. And under this, the Luxembourg government will be putting money direct into funds based in Luxembourg, which will be supporting climate-friendly investments. That will help to de-risk the investment, which gets to the point. We will be co-financing alongside that and leveraging in other private monies, and this is a way of catalyzing investments. I should put in a little plug, which is that tomorrow we have an event where we'll be talking a little bit more about this, and we may have some examples to announce and to bring out there. But this is an initiative which we've taken, which we are hoping we can then replicate and scale up, because everything which we're doing here, and I think I'm sure I speak for John too when I say everything we're here, the idea is to introduce models, to put models in place which can be replicated and rolled out across the globe.
John, certainly we also want to hear your perspective on that. Do you also see opportunities for mobilizing private capital as well as Jonathan just mentioned?
So let me tell you a story. Let's go to the state of Madhya Pradesh in India. About 3-4 years ago, if you'd have said, can you do solar power in Madhya Pradesh competitively with private sector financing, people would tell you, no, you're crazy. Okay, coal is so much cheaper, renewables are much more expensive. Renewables at that stage were around 8-9 cents, coal was 3-4 cents. You can't do it. We worked together with the state of Madhya Pradesh to put in a 750 megawatt solar power plant at a price that's cheaper at grid parity than coal. So they did it. How? What was the secret of putting this together? First thing that we did was we worked with the government of Madhya Pradesh to decide where the land was and to finance the land and the infrastructure and the evacuation lines before people were asked to bid. Because one of the big risks that companies face is, am I going to be able to get the risk? Who am I going to, the land? Who am I going to have to bribe? How many people are going to have to resettle to get it? So we got the land first, put the infrastructure in. So the bids were only on the basis of providing the solar panels. Second thing we did was to work on the Offtake Guarantee. They're very worried. They're selling money into offtake as distribution companies, and they don't know about the risk. So what did we do? We worked with the Delhi Rail Board to provide a wholesale contract to take 50% of the power out of this power plant, which gave them a stable, credit-worthy customer, which dramatically reduced the credit risk. And so this then allowed them to put the document together. Then when we came to the bidding documents, learning lessons from other things in the past, a standardized set of bidding documents with clauses in those bidding documents that were pre-positioned to ensure ways of reducing the risk through a dialogue with the government that made this happen. And so I think what you see here is a model that involves investments from the MDBs, policy commitments from the government, that allows you then to crowd in private financing. And so that combination is the package that's really powerful. Now, as Jonathan said, the value of this is in the demonstration. The challenge is how do we scale this up? So some of the things I've talked about are easy to scale up. The land element is relatively easy to scale up. However, as you go into Rajasthan and other spaces to get to the over 100 gigawatts of solar that India wants, you're not going to be able to do this with Delhi rail boards doing the offtake. So we need to be designing in the future mechanisms to reduce that risk, and that means then working with the distribution companies, with the regulators in India to try and improve the credit worthiness of those off-takers. So you begin to see a pattern where you really have to work together in order to do that. And then to come back to your question of leadership, I think there are two pieces here that are very important. The signal overall from the government of India to commit to 175 gigawatts of renewable energy is a strong signal that actually makes people think, well, it might actually be worth trying to get into this market because there's a big market in the future. And then at the more local level, this thing that I've described on Madhya Pradesh, this stuff didn't just come together automatically. It took a very dedicated state secretary of power to pull this together, to take a lot of risks, to do things that hadn't been done before, as was mentioned earlier, to change the mindset, to think of a different paradigm of how we put these deals together, because if we're stuck in the old way of doing things, we're never going to be able to break through.
Let's say with a moment for demonstrating and leading by example on Anne-Mette. Your company is a leading player in clean charcoal. Tell us a bit more.
Yeah. Well, we have developed a unique process of producing charcoal with no pollution. It's an innovative technology, and I actually think that innovation is common sense. It starts from common sense, and you use your experience, and you use all the new inputs from interesting people with knowledge in renewable energies, and you do a lot of brainstorming together, and I think we have found a very good solution for producing charcoal. We have a power plant producing green electricity for around 10,000 households in the Champagne area in France, and I think it's an important matter to talk about coal and charcoal, which are very often coming up all the time. And the difference is that the charcoal is a renewable energy coming from wood, and coal is fossil and non-renewable, and we are not we have to look into the use of charcoal instead of fossil fuels. Sustainability is very important.
That's a perfect introduction into our last topic, innovation. Jake, how can new as well as established institutions contribute to tackle climate change?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that I like to get to. So as I said earlier, climate change is a matter for designers and engineers and architects to actually improve on resource productivity. So there's a lot that can be done on that end when you plan a product, a building, whatever that might be. The other thing is to look into the data that we collect today. So we moved from an area of documenting what we are doing towards an era today where everything is connected. So NASA sent astronauts to the moon with a 2K RAM. And here I'm sitting in a coffee shop with my laptop and 1 gigabyte of RAM and post about my coffee, right? So, I mean, if you put this into perspective, there's a lot of data that we actually have access to and that we often don't use. I think it was over 9 billion devices internationally and worldwide that are connected. So one example, we've done some work with Washington, D.C., they have a goal that by 2032, they're the most healthiest and most sustainable city in North America. And in their eco-district, we worked with a company called geoengineering, and basically used satellite data, existing building information modeling data to identify which parts of which building systems can be improved. And so this is where data improved in terms of energy performance and efficiencies. So this is where data can actually have an important role. You can drive down an entire block and laser scan it and take that information and work with that. Likewise, you can do something we call generative design. This is a way of actually sort of mimicking nature's evolutionary process of taking various options into account and arriving at a perfect solution. This is an opportunity where you can lightweight products, and by doing so, you tighten the environmental footprint. You also look into the embodied carbon, so you can reduce that as well. So there's a number of different opportunities that are already existing today, as I said earlier, to really help to build an environmental, socially, and economically society for all of us. That technology is here today. We have to use it. We have to use it more urgently than ever before, and it will become stronger.
Two keywords I also hear quite often recently is fintech and blockchain. So, John, from a World Bank's perspective, do you already have experiences, examples that you can share with us in how this could help us scaling up climate finance?
Yeah, I think that both blockchain and fintech give you opportunities to think radically differently about how finance might work. Let me give you an example for each. So on blockchain, we've done some analysis that shows that if countries collaborate and can create carbon markets and trade carbon efficiently between countries, the cost of the aggregate level of the NDCs will fall by 30% by 2030 and 50% by 2050, simply by getting the carbon trade working so that you can make the investments where they're most appropriate. One of the huge problems in carbon trading is the verification of the underlying asset. Do you know what that underlying asset is? Do you know what you are buying? If you could get blockchain in place that could verify exactly what the source of each asset was, so that the buyers and sellers of those assets knew what they were buying and selling, it would make that market significantly more efficient. And so I think that would create an opportunity to accelerate that carbon market, drive down the price of implementation of the NDCs. That's number one. On fintech, two small examples. In Kenya, there's a company that rolled out small solar packages to households. And one of the problems in the past has been, how do you know that the household is actually going to pay you for that panel and make the payment on it? Because once they've got the panel, they've got the electricity, and so the incentives are quite difficult. What they did was they sold they gave the panel for free to the households, but they locked it technologically onto the cell phone. And so the payment is made through the cell phone account back to the supplier, and the number of the households are now incentivized to keep the payment going. The transaction costs of making the payments are lower, and so it created this opportunity to create a whole new business that overcame some of the risks that I was talking about. Likewise, in solar, there's some examples now emerging in the Caribbean of companies investing in solar that used electronically based crowdsourcing from small individual investors, just like almost like the GoFundMe model, that actually consolidated financing, that basically cut out the middlemen that you would usually have for this investment. Now, this is not going to work for a huge power plant, but for some small rooftop investors, this bypass of the traditional system certainly allows us to move forward. So I think there's a lot of technology, but the point I would make, it's not just technology as in IT, it's technology and innovation on institutions and social practices that are as important as the hardware and the software and the geeky engineers. I think there's roles for innovation both on the social sciences and politics and on the technology.
Radical changes. Jonathan, from EIB's perspective, where do you see the journey go with blockchain, fintechs in scaling up climate finance?
Well, I agree very much with what John was saying. I mean, I think the first point I'd make, of course, we shouldn't overlook the fact there is already a very substantial amount of funding funding available in conventional funds. I mean, on some measures, there are over 20 trillion funds now using ESG metrics. There is also plenty there, which I think one of the trends which has been striking since Paris is the way in which investment in climate-friendly vehicles, investment in climate-friendly things has shifted away from just being exclusively the preserve of so-called ethical funds and moved into a much more mainstream area, which I think is a good thing. And that's a function of the fact that investors in a hard-headed way think, right, these policymakers are really walking the walk here, and these changes are going to happen, and we're going to be stuck with a lot of stranded assets unless we shift our strategy. That said, there's plenty of scope for more. And that's where the fintech and the new technologies come in, because, as John says, it's a way of bringing in a more sort of cost-effective investment from the point of view of, I suppose, smaller investors or whatever. Clearly, there are problems that need to be challenges, perhaps I should put it, that need to be overcome in terms of how these structures are regulated and controlled in order to ensure that there are not inadvertent market failures, if I can put it that way. But there's plenty of scope there, I think.
Let's get again a bit more concrete on Mette. How do you innovate at Carbonex?
Yeah, as I said earlier, we are using our common sense, our experience in the work. We have been producing charcoal for 25 years, working in the barbecue business and now in the renewable energy business. I think it's innovation is really a matter of using your experience, reaching your goal, like observing and getting there in the right way, using the right inputs and really getting there as fast as possible, because we are in a urgent situation in the climate change. We should all do our possible to each in each scale. I mean, we are producing in a small scale compared to what our market is. To go back to the charcoal business, just for barbecuing in Europe is around 800,000 tons of charcoal. We are able to produce around 10,000 tons of charcoal. So a lot of the production, a lot of the charcoal is coming as import to the market from resources that are not sustainable, deforestation, where child labor, social problems, terrorism. There's a lot of bad arguments for producing in a sustainable way and using replanted wood and taking care of planting trees around. We want to make the forest increase in. We are working in France, so of course we are concerned about the French forest, but our argument is that the whole world should be aware of the forest and of replanting and producing electricity from biomass, valorizing the biomass. We are producing charcoal and green electricity with the excess gas and heat. So it's a solution that fits a lot of countries. We have a lot of requests from Africa and other places in the world where charcoal is used for cooking and for heating, and unfortunately those countries are not ready or aware of the problem in a long-term thinking. The importance of the institutions and the governments to follow these new projects are very important.
Let's get back for a moment to the question of how companies like Carbonex can be connected to the capital markets or to investors in general. Mary Robinson, how can investors be motivated, incentivized to focus more on climate as well as people-friendly investments?
I think we're in a clear transition that's urgent. I think we recognize that. And I would love to challenge the investors in this room to think in terms of how to be not just climate friendly, but also people friendly. Because it's not just a matter of assessing your climate risks and reducing emissions. Both of those are incredibly important. It's also the benefits to people. Now, if you listen to what has been said about a project here, a project in France, in a resilient country with the access to finance that you've been able to get. But what you're doing is incredibly important in a world that I know all too well. I was the special envoy of the Secretary General for the Great Lakes in Africa. Charcoal is a huge problem, and it's dirty charcoal, it's polluting, and it's cutting down trees. And why can't we have more thought about how to take your idea and make it an investment possibility? But I also have a warning on the negative side that I think it is important to recognize. And I'm very close to the Human Rights Business and Resource Center. And I was a bit shocked before Paris when the head of it told me, Mary, I have to say to you, we are getting more complaints about human rights abuses by those who are providing clean energy. Now, we're all in favor of clean energy. It is a new industry, and it is making a lot of mistakes, of mega projects without proper regard to participation of local people, to being aware of and they are trampling on land rights and water rights. And let me just give you an example, and I'm actually borrowing an example of a Maasai pastoralist whom my foundation helped to come to this COP. And she's been very active in telling her story in the COP itself. And her story is, she's a pastoralist from the region in Kenya where the biggest wind farm has been built. And I think the World Bank was invested in it, if I'm right, and certainly Denmark was heavily invested. And they didn't recognize that pastoralists have land rights. That's where they bring their animals. And this was done without any consultation. And what Agnes says, as a pastoralist from Kenya, I am all in favor of wind power. It would be great for my country, but it should have been done the right way. Now it's blocked by legal action. And that's a waste to everybody. So it is really important that the guidelines, the UN guidelines on business and human rights apply in the climate space. That we recognize that climate action must respect human rights, must be gender sensitive, gender responsive. And when we can get that idea of the benefits for people, I think it will also help to maximize the role of climate finance also in being people-centered and benefiting people. It could have a huge impact. And I mean, why have we got these trillions in investments that are not giving them big return? Surely we can do far more. And it's not just a de-risking, it's also incentivizing them to see the benefits for a more equitable and safe world. And it's about people too.
Mm-hmm. It's about people and involving people. I think that's the perfect timing to open the floor for questions from the audience. Please, if you have a question, please briefly state your name, your organization, and address the question directly to one of the panelists up here. Maybe start in the first row there.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Armo Jost. I'm president of Arnold Schwarzenegger Foundation R20. And I would like to give one example and also to point out what is, from my feeling, the most important in this COP23. It is my first one, and I'm impressed of all what the upper level is doing. I'm also impressed of how from the bottom up it comes. One example is with Bertrand. I was former CEO of the biggest incineration plant of Switzerland, owned by the SIG. And Bertrand, we were the first one probably that studied your support by SIG. You remember certainly, and I was one of the members who signed. And we believed in it. I admire you, how you could present your project. You are lucky because you have a family, you have a history to say. R20 Foundation, R20 region, has also a story to say that reach everyone through Arnold, through Christoph, that brought this idea to Arnold. And we can reach you all at the upper level. I'm impressed of Carbonex because you are small, in between all the big players, and you try to reach them, and I'm sure it's very hard. It's very hard for all the small and medium enterprise to get access to the higher level. I was before also in high finance involved, and I can see in big banks, and I can see how difficult it is from the top investor to find who in the small and medium enterprise is able to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement. So I challenged Jens Nielsen for next year, the organizer of this event, to bring small and medium enterprise as one name with project that you can support. And I think this connection from the top to the bottom is what is missing in the next COP, and I hope it comes.
For that statement. Maybe the lady at the back. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Jane Oyugi, CEO of Sustainable Company Limited in Tanzania. And I pose this question to not only Carbonex, but all the investors and all of us who are looking to mitigate climate change. So in Tanzania, approximately 2 million tons of charcoal is consumed in Tanzania, 50% of that in the urban city of Dar es Salaam. And this charcoal is dirty fuel, dirty charcoal. If we were to take that 2 million tons per year of clean charcoal produced by a company like Carbonex, think about what that would do to the carbon emissions in Tanzania, just for that particular area. So my challenge is, while I spoke with Carbonex, and they have a facility in France, obviously they would probably need financing to build up another refinery in Tanzania, because that's the better way to do it, is put the factory close to where you're producing the charcoal. So my challenge is investors, people, not only in Tanzania, but what about all the other developing countries in sub-Saharan Africa? If you just take a look at not only in Africa, but what about in India, in South America, where charcoal is being consumed by people, dirty fuel, dirty carbon. And here we have a company that can create clean carbon. That's my question. What can we do?
Thanks very much for the question. Anne-Mette?
Thank you very much, Jane. It is a big issue. Charcoal is a big issue, global issue, and we would be very happy and pleased to be able to help everywhere in the world. We can adapt our technology to each country, to each place, but of course we need financial partners. And you're very welcome to contact us after this panel. We are present out here in with a stand.
We have time for one more question. Gentleman, yes, exactly.
Thank you. My name is Henry Ries. I'm of the German-French Association and NGO Energy Franco-Allemande. And it's a question to Vice President Taylor. We haven't spoken about oceans here. It's 72% of the world's surface, doesn't have a lobby because there are no voters. And we, in the last years, have done quite a lot of projects in the oceans. And I was recently at a conference, a lot of political people were also there, Biomarine in Canada. And we brought together some French and some Germans. And we had a close meeting with the people of Quebec Investment and the ministers and so on.
What's the question,
and
please?
we realized that they don't have any experts to say if a project by a startup or by somebody else is viable or not. There were also people of DG Mare. They handed us a report by the European Investment Bank, but they said they also don't have really experts. So it is very difficult to invest in something where even the very prestigious Bank of Engineers European Investment Bank probably doesn't have all the fullest expertise. So how could one enhance that, especially for these ocean projects where apparently in the financing world the expertise of the bankers is not quite there? I was also surprised to understand that.
Well, we are trying to develop that expertise, and I think we have a certain amount of that expertise, if I may say so, and I think that the other institutions do. But of course, we can do this better. I mean, I think it's worth. I mean, just you mentioned oceans. We are. We have recently provided some funding to a business which is doing research into marine algae. We are putting money into via the Caribbean Development Bank for ocean-friendly investments there, and we have indeed put some money into the Althelia Oceans Fund as well. So there are a number of areas where we're doing these things. We hope to do more of them. We are building up expertise. I can't create instant experts, but I think we can all carry on doing this. But I think the important point is, and I think you're right to put your finger on this. The important point is to see these challenges which we have as holistic ones. So what we're doing. What we do, as far as oceans is concerned, also has a positive impact as far as the climate is concerned, or relates to adaptation to climate change. So these different goals, these different things need to be seen holistically, and we need to be moving forward in that way.
So I know there are plenty of other questions in the room. Please hold them for a minute, and let's take them up outside later in the meeting area. But for now, let's give back the word to the panel here for a final statement, for a call to action in your view. And let's start with John. In the next 5 years, what needs to happen that we don't cook our planet?
I think that I'd like to pick up on something that Mary said at the beginning about the urgency of action and where we need to go, and what Bertrand said about changing minds. I could talk about lots of detail we need to do in the next 5 years, but I think it's a question of leadership and mindset. And let me go back. Okay, we're talking about a world that we want to see 30 years from now, almost 2050. What is that world going to look like? What are the opportunities? How does it take to get there? But let's step back 30 years. Take us back to 1987, okay? I was in Germany in 1987 working for a management consulting company. And as we wandered around doing a piece of analytic work, I had a box that was this big that passed as a luggable computer, okay? Now we have this that's got like 10 times, 100 times more power than that little computer did. Secondly, I was in Germany. Germany was split between East and West Germany, and you needed passports to go all over Europe. That is now completely different. I was, at that time, a refugee from South Africa with no hope of being able to go back to my country. Within 5 years, that had completely changed. And so my point is that the world that we're looking at any point in time, both from technology and institutions and politics, can change and can change quite quickly. In the 5 or 10 years from 1987 to 1997, the world had changed completely, and it can change again. But it doesn't change automatically. It takes leadership. And a lot of us, in terms of leadership, think about the big boys and girls. Okay, we think Gorbachev, we think Mandela, we think Steve Jobs. But behind each one of those, there was a lot of technical people doing the work. There were kids out on the street in Alexandria in South Africa. There were people storming the walls in Eastern Europe. All of these things come together, which I think creates the points. And the 2 points are, one, we should envisage and think about a different world from the one we are. And then we need to figure out how can we change that world to make it the world we want to see, and there's roles for everybody to do it.
Thank you, John. Jake?
Yeah, I have a very quick roundup of all of this. So first of all, urgency is important. We heard that over the last couple of days in so many ways. For us, well, my message would be if more designers, engineers, city planners, project owners really look into these issues very early on in the project, using the opportunity to simulate and optimize and analyze before you send out a construction firm to start constructing something or press the button and manufacture something. The more we do upfront, the much easier we can all move the needle into the right direction, and that is obviously below the 2 degrees if we can manage that. But it really takes a long-term system view. If you look at cities, this is a system of a system. Information itself is not just a carrier of a system, it is a system by itself. So we have a lot of work in front of us. As I said, the opportunities are there, the technology is there, it's going to be improving even further, and we'd just like to encourage everybody who is building something to look into analyzing the energy, optimizing that, and optimize the resource efficiencies.
Thank you, Jake. Anne-Mette, Jonathan, maybe each 30 seconds, very briefly.
Yeah, I think the issue of charcoal has been taken up now, and I think we are considering ourselves as leaders in sustainable charcoal production. So I'm very, very happy that this issue has been taken up. It's an important matter, and I'm very glad that you are now aware of it.
I think mainstreaming of climate considerations has come on enormously in the last few years. We need to keep that up. We need to keep up the pressure. We need to cascade it down. We need to move at every level. I'm an optimist, so I think we are making progress. But the only way in which we are going to keep on making progress is if we all don't slack.
Thanks for the brief statement. Ladies and gentlemen, dear panelists, thank you so much. Have a great day.